Hi everyone, and welcome back to Bowdie Shorts, making law make sense in 15 minutes or less. Today we're looking at one of the most practical topics in trust law, trusts of the family home. For many people, their home is their most valuable asset, but when relationships break down, difficult questions will arise. One partner may be named on the title deeds, the other partner may have contributed money, paid bills, renovated the property, or looked after children. So the question becomes, who really owns the family home? And that's exactly what we're going to answer today. Now, the first thing to remember is that different rules apply depending on whether the couple are married or not. If a married couple divorces, the family courts have wide powers to redistribute property. But if an unmarried couple separates, there is no equivalent statutory regime. Despite the popular myth, there is no such thing as a common law marriage. So for cohabiting couples, ownership disputes are usually resolved using trust law. So the first question in every family home problem is there an express declaration of trust? If the parties have signed a declaration setting out their beneficial shares, then that will usually determine ownership. For example, they may have agreed 50-50 ownership, 60-40 ownership, or any other division that they choose. Now, where a valid express trust exists, the court will usually respect it. The difficult cases arise when nobody thought about ownership and nothing was written down. Now, you may remember from one of our previous videos that resulting trusts focus on contributions to the purchase price. So if somebody contributes money towards buying a property, they may receive a beneficial interest that reflects that contribution. The problem is that family life doesn't usually work like a business transaction. Resulting trusts largely ignore childcare, domestic responsibilities, household management, many later financial contributions. So imagine one partner buys the house and the other spends 10 years caring for children while paying the household expenses. Now, a resulting trust would ignore most of that. And this is why modern family home disputes are usually determined using the common intention constructive trust. And this is the heart of this video. The court asks, did the parties intend that both should have an interest in the home? And the answer depends on whether the property is jointly owned or solely owned. So let's start with a simple situation, joint ownership. So in this, both partners are registered as legal owners, and the starting point is equal beneficial ownership. So the law assumes that if both partners own the legal title jointly, they also own the beneficial interest equally, so usually 50% each. And this reflects the principle that equity follows the law. Now, can that be challenged? Yes. A partner who wants more than half must establish that there was a different common intention and this concept of detrimental reliance. They relied on that statement and have suffered a detriment due to that. So simply contributing more towards the initial purchase price will not usually be enough by itself. The courts generally require evidence that the parties intended ownership to be different from 50-50. In practice, equal ownership remains the normal outcome unless there is convincing evidence to the contrary. Now let's move to the more difficult situation, sole ownership. So this is where only one partner appears on the legal title. The other partner is not a legal owner. Now here, there is no presumption that beneficial ownership is shared. The non-owning partner must establish a beneficial interest, and this involves two stages. Stage one is to establish the trust, and stage two is to work out the size of the beneficial shares. Let's look at those in more detail. So when it comes to establishing the trust, to establish that a common intention constructive trust exists, the claimant must show common intention and detrimental reliance. Without both, the claim fails. Now, there are two ways to prove common intention, though. Method number one is known as express common intention. And this is an express discussion or understanding. The parties say something which indicates shared ownership. For example, this house is as much yours as mine. Now, that may demonstrate a common intention that both parties should have a beneficial interest. By contrast, you'll always have somewhere to live is much weaker. That statement may simply refer to occupation rather than ownership. And the court is looking for evidence that the parties intended to share the property itself. Now, even if common intention exists, that is not enough, remember. The claimant must also show that they relied on it, this concept of detrimental reliance. Now, examples might include paying towards the mortgage, funding home improvements, contributing significant household expenses, giving up employment, or taking on childcare responsibilities. The detriment, you may know, does not need to be purely financial, but it must be substantial. So as an example, suppose Victoria owns a house in her sole name. She tells Joseph, I want to think of this house as much yours as mine. Joseph then contributes to improvements and structures his affairs on the basis of that understanding. Now, a court in these circumstances may well conclude that a common intention constructive trust has arisen. Now, that was the first method. Let's move to method two, inferred common intention. And this is where we go if there was never any conversation about ownership. And that is actually very common. In those circumstances, the court looks at conduct, and the strongest evidence will come from financial contributions. So what we're looking for here are direct contributions, and these include contributions to the deposit, contributions to the purchase price, significant mortgage payments. Such contributions may allow the court to infer a common intention. Importantly, these payments often establish both common intention and detrimental reliance. But then we have to also consider indirect contributions, which can also be relevant. So suppose one partner pays most of the household expenses, which enables the other partner to pay the mortgage. Now, in some circumstances, the court may treat those payments as indirect contributions towards acquisition of the home. But direct financial contributions will always remain the strongest evidence. Let's look at an example. So suppose Eve buys a house in her sole name. Her partner Frank pays for a new bathroom and patio. He also pays 6 months of mortgage installments. Now, the renovations alone may not establish a trust, but the mortgage contributions place him in a much stronger position. A court may infer both common intention and detrimental reliance from those payments. Now, the second stage then is that we need to look at quantifying the shares. So once the trust exists, the next question is, how much does each person own? And sometimes the parties agreed the answer. If so, the court will usually respect that. More commonly, there is no evidence of intended percentages. In that situation, the court looks at the whole course of dealing between the parties. And when we look at whole course of dealing, relevant factors will include the discussions that were held at the time of purchase, why the home was put into one name or two, how the purchase was financed, what mortgage contributions have been made and by who, household expenses and how have they been dealt with, how have childcare responsibilities been managed, also how are finances organised between the two people, what is the nature of their relationship. Now, the aim of looking at all of these things is to determine what is fair. And importantly, beneficial shares do not automatically mirror financial contributions. The court is going to consider a much wider picture. So as an example, Suppose Georgina owns a house in her sole name. Her partner Hattie pays 1/3 of the mortgage. She also contributes more towards household expenses and cares for their children. Even though her direct mortgage contribution is 1/3, a court may award her more than a 1/3 beneficial share by considering the entire course of dealing between the parties. Now, the final topic we've got to consider in this video is the topic of proprietary estoppel. And this is another route by which someone may acquire rights in property. And the basic idea is simple. It may be unfair to allow somebody to go back on their word. Now, to establish proprietary estoppel, the claimant must show assurance, reliance, and detriment. So let's take those one at a time, starting with assurance. So the legal owner must make a representation or create an expectation. Examples include, this house will be yours one day, or I'll leave this property to you when I die. Once we've got assurance, we need reliance, and the claimant must have acted because of that assurance. The promise does not need to be the only reason for their actions, but it must influence their conduct. The final thing is that the claimant must suffer a substantial detriment. So examples would include spending money improving the property, moving location, giving up a job, caring for somebody without payment, or working for little or no remuneration. So as an example, suppose Idris promises his niece Janet he will leave her his house. Janet moves across the country, spends money improving the property, and helps care for Idris in his later years. When Idris dies, he leaves the house to somebody else. Now, Janet may have a proprietary estoppel claim because she relied on Idris's assurance and suffered detriment as a result. Now, the remedies for proprietary estoppel is where they differ from a constructive trust. So a constructive trust determines ownership. Proprietary estoppel gives the court flexibility, and possible remedies can include transfer of ownership, a beneficial interest, a right to occupy, financial compensation, and the court's objective here is to use whatever means will allow it to achieve a fair result. So what's Bowdie's bottom line here? Well, every family home dispute starts with one question. Who really owns the home? Start with an express trust. If there is none, then consider whether the home is jointly or solely owned. Think about common intention constructive trusts and look at whether you can establish common intention and detrimental reliance, and then determine the beneficial shares. And whenever someone has acted on a promise about property, think proprietary estoppel, because legal ownership may tell part of the story. Equity's job is deciding whether it tells the whole story. Thanks for watching this video in our Bowdie short series. There will be further videos in the series available via our YouTube channel in the very near future. Thank you very much for watching.